Hi, and welcome to Gartner Live. Today, we're going to talk about how to help your employees manage the emotional toll of the COVID-19 crisis, whether it's stress, fear, or the uncertainty about the future. I'm Heather Pemberton Levy, and I'm joined by Christy Struckman, who's Vice President and Analyst in our CIO Research Group. She also has a doctorate in organizational behavior, and before the pandemic, she was writing research about psychological leadership. Afterwards, she's been helping our clients deal with this current situation. Hi, Christy.
Hi, Heather.
Now, it's April 15th, and employees and organizations are starting to think about what happens when we're no longer working from home or staying at home. And I want to find out from you what you're hearing is on the minds of organizations and leaders right now.
So right now, we need to realize that we might be working from home a little longer than we were expecting, which in and of itself is adding more stress to our employees in their home life. When we first started working from home, we were suddenly trying to pull together, okay, how do I get work done? How do I handle kids? How do I handle my relatives near and far? How do I make this new thing work? But I worry that we're going to look too far into the future about when we get back home without realizing that right now that we're going to be staying home maybe even longer than we were expecting, there's a whole new set of stresses that can be adding on to them. And what do I mean by that? One stress could be maybe when you figured out how to work from home, you didn't worry about setting up a comfortable place. I was talking to a client who admitted to me that he was taking his really important phone calls in his car because he had better Wi-Fi service in a parking lot than he had at his home. Well, I'm just not sure that that's sustainable for another 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks, whatever it is. But the second thing that happens when we're staying home is that we're even isolated even longer than we were before. And we know that isolation is one of those things that it gets worse the longer and longer that we experiencing it. So those social networks that were severed need to be filled in some way.
Right. And so how are organizations adapting to this prospect that a workforce might be working from home for a more extended period of time?
So they're realizing that we have to step up our work family-ness. We have to realize that our work families have to help with those social networks. And I'm hearing lots of really great ideas about what organizations are doing to try and empower and enable their employees to still feel connected. We're hearing about cocktail hours. We're hearing about lunch meetings over WebEx. We're hearing about book clubs that are reinvigorating that maybe lost their energy over time. So those are just things that are allowing the socialness that we all need because we're humans, we are social animals, to have another outlet. That's certainly one thing. But the other thing is that because our employees are doing crazy things like listening to the news and learning that lots of people are losing their jobs, that the economy is not going well, they're worried about their jobs. They're worried about, well, what's going to be the impact to me? And so managers are quickly realizing that what they need to do is help their employees to understand what's going on and how the work that they're doing really adds value to what the organization is. So we've always talked about how important it is for people to be clear about their value. The work that I do, how is this valuable to the customers or the citizens that we serve, and how our company chooses to respond to those needs. We've always talked about why that was important. It is exceptionally important when, frankly, I'm worried about losing my job. And I feel a little bit of some sense of control if I know that the work that I'm doing has value. So we've been talking to a lot of clients about reminding their employees, being clear about taking the changing strategies of the organization and making sure that at whatever part of the organization your team works in, you've drawn that linkage and you've said, here's what we're trying to do. Here's what we get to do to support our company, which helps people focus, which is a good thing. So there's a business value to it. But what it also does is it really helps employees to understand the value that they provide, which gives them just a little bit more psychological safety in the work that they're doing.
It sounds as though it's more important than ever to reinforce mission statements, values, and the overall culture in this time, not just focus on those critical needs of the moment, but build that bridge to the bigger picture. I want to remind our viewers that we will be taking questions later in the program, so post them in the comments section and we'll get to as many as we can in a little bit. Let's talk a little bit, Christy, about some of the solutions that organizations have had to come up with. They've all been very agile. There's been a lot of urgency and pressure to continue with business operations in this remote work environment, in changing operations based on the circumstances. What kind of pressure is that putting on employees, and how can leaders manage in these less than ideal situations?
There's always good news and bad news in any situation that there is. I think some of the good news is that there has been some step function progress in digitalization efforts because people had to figure out how to get their work done in this remote environment. I've spoken to clients where I talked to one woman where she had a 6-month plan to roll out Microsoft Teams as a collaboration tool, and she got it rolled out in 2 weeks. So check, done. That big project off the plate. I talked to another client who they had 2 modules of an ERP system ready to roll out, but had just been getting some pushback from the business to, cut the cord proverbially and roll it out. He was able to get those 2 modules rolled out in 5 days. So for digitalization efforts, I think that's the good news of what this current situation has forced. But there's not all good news, which is if organizations haven't already felt it, many are going to be feeling those cost pressures. And that is where the scariness comes in, because cost pressures typically means, gosh, is there a way for us to have less people in our organization? But again, that provides an opportunity for people to feel like they could make a contribution. So I've been talking to clients about, if the cost pressures haven't hit you yet, they're around the corner. So why don't you focus your teams on saying, what could we do proactively to identify these opportunities for cost pressure so that when they come, we have a plan, we've already thought about what is it that we're going to be doing. So I know I'm talking about strategies and cost pressures, and so the connection might be, well, how does this relate to the emotions? Well, this is where we have to remember that people are feeling pressure to do a good job at work, and they want work to do that they know has value and will matter to the organization. So even if it's something scary like, how can we reduce our costs? It's it's giving people something to focus, to help the company that they work for to get through this crisis, hopefully as easy as possible.
Are there techniques leaders can use to help balance those pressures? So in one sense, you're suggesting let's give employees some areas of focus to help them feel productive. But how do they also balance that with employees potentially feeling overwhelmed with too much?
Yeah, so I really worry about people overworking. There's this incredibly false misperception that people are less productive when they work from home. There's no evidence to support that. So I don't really understand why that misperception continues. But it's not just the pressures of working from home. Here's what happens when people work from home, they want to prove that they're working. So they work a little bit harder to prove that even if I would work less hard in the office, because I'm at home, I have to work hard. At the same time, their kids are trying to do their distance learning. They've got maybe adults, they've got maybe a parent in the nursing home that they're really worried about. So they're working really hard because their company needs them to kind of dig in to make things work. They're working hard because they want to prove their value. They're trying to manage these extra pressures of their home life, all at the time when the number one thing that all of us should be doing is getting a good night's rest, eating healthy, and exercising, all of which take time. So the message is very confusing, I think, right now about what really are the priorities. So I think there's a bunch of things that managers can do and employees can ask of their managers to do in this situation. So one of them is look for the opportunities to be flexible. One pattern that I've noticed is that some people are trying to replicate what they do in the office in the home environment. So I spoke to a sales leader who had said, "Hey, my team, when we get together in the morning, we kind of sit around our coffee, we plan our day, and then we head off. So I'm going to schedule an 8 a.m. kickoff call every day so that we can kind of get together, have our cups of coffee, and plan our day." And I advised him against that. I said, excellent idea, but not a good strategy, because Lord only knows what your employees are dealing with at 8. Maybe 8 works for you, but it might not work for everybody else. So we have to think about where are opportunities to be flexible, to allow people to try to balance all of these. Another thing I've been trying to do personally, and I'm encouraging the world to do, is when a little kid happens into the camera of a meeting, I think we should just embrace it. Let's not, make the person feel like they have to shove their kid out of the way and kind of convey a negative message that way. This is our world right now. Kids are going to, come in and out of cameras. They're trying their best. So that kind of flexibility, I think, also really matters. I'd mentioned about sort of encouraging the social network type stuff. Make it all voluntary so that people can choose to participate or not choose to participate. Is another thing that we can do. And then the last thing is just strive for as much transparency as we can. Rumors and fear set in the absence of information. So saying, here's what we know. And I want to be really clear. I'm not saying anybody needs to become an infectious disease specialist or an economist overnight. But what we can do is we can take the messages from our leadership, continue to reinforce them and pass them down, try to contextualize them so that they make sense given the work that our teams do. We can get comfortable with "I don't know," because a very common question right now is, well, hey, do you know when we're going to be back in the office? And for most of us, the answer is, I don't know. That's okay, because that's authentic and that's what people are looking for. And then just my last advice in this transparency is, when there's a lot of uncertainty, we're really pretty grateful when we have a strategy and we say, okay, look, given everything that's going on right now, let's do these 3 things. And usually we're so happy to have those 3 things that we just say the 3 things and we say, okay, go team, go. But we should explain why those 3 actions were the ones that were taken. And the reason is because the context that gets explained in talking about the why is very informative for people in all the decisions that they have to make every day. All the hundreds of decisions that we make about where should we spend our time and how do we focus and what should I push harder on versus what should I let go of. I learn by understanding the greater context.
Right. The details you're providing about that transparency and context are really helpful because we may think, well, we don't know when we're going back to work, so I won't say anything. But if it's on your employees' minds, it helps to maybe raise it because then there isn't that vacuum of information and people starting to wonder and have it become bigger and more stressful in their own head. So I think that's very helpful advice as well as setting that context. Now let's talk about those workers who don't have the benefit of working from home. There's certainly several industries where they are actually still going to work. And how are organizations dealing with that at this time?
So whether you're working from home or you're going into the office, the pressures are all the same. They look and they feel a little bit different. So if you're at home, maybe you didn't have to worry about childcare if your childcare facility closed down. While if you're going into the office, you're still worried about taking care of your kids, and so you're trying to figure that out. But both are still worried about their kids and figuring out, how do we traverse this environment. So I think we just need to realize that if somebody is in the office, they're they're building and they're making those two things work together is still separate, which that separateness comes with stress. And so I think as managers, we need to understand that there are these additional stresses. It's uncomfortable when maybe I take public transportation to my job and there's 5 people in the subway car all wearing masks. We're all sitting away from each other. While it might be a nice quiet commute, it's very salient that there's a pandemic going on because there's not a lot of people, everybody's wearing masks, like it's front and center, always in front of them. So this is where a little bit of creativity can go a long way. I spoke to a manager who was making it a point. He had 5 people on his team that were essential workers, and so they had to go into the office. And every week, he would buy 5 bouquets of flowers, and on his way back from the grocery store, would drop them off at his employee's house because he realized that his employees' significant others were dealing with an additional burden of having the kids at home and all underfoot and all of that. And I thought that was so great. That small little gesture was helping their employees to understand that their manager understands that there's these additional stressors. And that's really what people are looking for, is they're looking for, do you understand what it is that I'm having to deal with? And are you helping me in whatever way that you can? So we certainly, all of us have already, we're past the phase of being clear about, okay, when you're in the office, do we take your temperature when you're coming in? Do you wear masks? The social distancing. We've taken care of the physicalness of it. But there's an emotional component to it, and that you learn by, again, just talking to them, those sort of more frequent check-ins to sort of say, hey, how are things going this week? How are things at home? What are the challenges? How can we help? That's another reason to tap into that work family and jump in and say, hey, your work family is here. How can we be helping you?
Absolutely. I love that story about the flowers. So I'm going to ask you one more question and then get to viewer questions because several are coming in. As we head back to work eventually, whenever we do, another question that's on many employees and leaders' minds is, what are we going to take with us? What does it look like? What do we bring from this experience that doesn't, shouldn't leave? And what do we have to be careful that we want to make sure we don't leave behind? Are you starting to shape any thoughts around that?
Definitely. So I hope the work familyness continues. I hope this belief that we should separate work and the home life diminishes, and that we embrace the getting togetherness. I was on a call with 12 people, and when I was talking about some of this, I put up some ideas of things that they could do around social networks. Well, it turned out that 8 of them were musicians. They did not know that about each other. And then they decided they were going to put on a little concert for their team. I hope that those sort of connections we don't walk away from. So that's Christy's hope. Practically, I worry about what I call digital backsliding. I'm not so worried about, are we going to backslide in terms of the remote working, because we're learning that CFOs, for example, are very interested in the cost savings that can come from having some portion of your work working remotely. So I'm pretty sure that some semblance of the remote working barrier is being cut down. I worry more about these digital initiatives that we had to very quickly make a lot of progress on, that when people go back into the office, we'll walk away from them. And then it's really clear that once somebody has sort of made a journey to learning how to do something new, if they revert back, their journey through that is twice as hard. So I think that we should all be asking ourselves, of the things that we figured out how to do differently today, what do we want to continue? And let's not leave that to happenstance to happen. Let's put it in our plan. How are we going to not backslide? Maybe there's a nicer way to say it, but digital backslide gets people the point. How do we not go back to sometimes these inefficient ways of doing work?
And we want to hold on to these efficiencies and take them with us, because as you said earlier, the development has really ramped up, and some organizations have made tremendous progress in very short periods of time. Let's not lose that. Okay, we are going to get to viewer questions now. Our first one is from the UK, and asks, how can companies foster psychological safety?
So psychological safety is that comfort that I have to not only do my job, but to actually even take risks when I'm doing my job. So there's a couple of really important components to this. And at the top of the list is the quality of my relationship with my manager. If I have a good, healthy, transparent, open relationship with my manager, then I'm going to feel a little bit more comfortable being vulnerable, asking for help when I need it, letting my manager know that I'm overwhelmed. So I want to be really clear. I actually have some really tough advice around this, is that in a non-COVID crisis situation, if I was talking to a client and they said, hey, I've got a manager who doesn't have a good relationship with his employees, that conversation would be around, well, let's learn their emotional intelligence. Let's understand what their issues are. Are they maybe feeling insecure themselves? Like, we would do sort of a longer diagnostic to root cause. No time for that. If you have anybody in your organization that does not have healthy relationships with their managers, you need to step over, step through, step around, and help those employees, because they are probably not getting the information they need to make their decisions, and they definitely are probably feeling more threatened because they don't even feel like they can highlight, what's going on. So first and foremost would be being really clear about those relationships with their managers and jumping in if there's an issue.
Got it. Okay, we have a couple questions from Hannah in Ukraine, and she asks how to make people feel valued and recognized at this time, and also how can you, this is I think from the other standpoint, how can you make your contributions visible and demonstrate they have been noted? So I think that's interesting from both sides.
Right. So I know that my work is valuable when I'm clear about what's the work that we're supposed to be doing, and I'm able to stay in touch with the shifting priorities, because some priorities are shifting. Some things are, okay, I know for 3 years we've said our priority is this, but today it's this. So staying in touch with that. If you feel that you're not getting it from your manager, jumping in on calls where you think you might, taking ownership, grabbing some agency and saying, I need to know what our priorities are, And then being clear about, now what's my contribution to that? If our priority is that we're trying, before we were always talking about increasing customers and now we're just trying to retain, then what's my role in helping to retain clients? I might feel like it's a small role, but it all, plays up. So making sure that you do understand how what it is that you're doing matters to the organization overall. And if you can't draw that link, then asking your management to help you to draw that link. When you are clear about what is the work that I'm doing and how I add value, that lets you know where you are in that value chain, and it helps you to get clear about, well, then maybe these are the parts of my job I should do a little bit more, a little bit harder, make sure I do it even a little bit more thoroughly than maybe we were told to do beforehand. And then on the flip side of that, which is, okay, I'm working really hard and I'm worried about getting lost in the shuffle, then that's again where you take those priorities. And when you're having your one-on-ones with your manager or in your team calls, encourage the conversation of, hey, so let's talk about as a group, what are we doing against these initiatives? And I think it's important to do it both individually with your management, but also as a group. Because frankly, that's how you can get some understanding of how other people on your team are handling this. And maybe you're working really hard on your piece of the pie, but nobody else is working on the other pieces that have to get done as well in order to get the results. And so you could be potentially spinning your wheel if you don't have that sense of what everybody else is doing and contributing.
Yep, that makes sense. Okay, Nathan from Zimbabwe asked a question that I think is on a number of people's minds, which is, if teams can achieve results by working from home, what might be the reason to report to the office after this period?
Well, I'll give my not helpful answer first, and then we'll go to a helpful one, which is that, a lot of senior leadership grew up in the office. And that's their comfort zone, and that's how they understand. Remember, management is all about directing and controlling the work. And so they've come up with their systems and mechanisms to do that assume presence. Well, their world's a little bit rocked right now because they're having to figure out how to feel comfortable leading their organizations without having that. So that's my not helpful response, because I think that it might be hard for some leaders to sort of let that go. I think that a more helpful response is that I was working with some clients here in the United States, and I said, while you have a little bit of slack, why don't you start documenting the savings that you are realizing right now because people are working remotely? And so they, for example, had a couple of very senior leader meetings that, of course, were supposed to be done face to face that are now being done virtually. And I said, well, why don't you document what was the past travel costs of that and renting the space and all of that? Here's the bottom line. We're heading into cost pressures. So if people want to know, how can I encourage potentially being able to work from home because it's working for me, I think the most influential factor is going to be the cost opportunities for doing that.
Right. Okay, we're going to take one more question, and I think it's a good one to end on, from Gergan. With extended lockdowns and bad news coming from all around, how does one stay motivated and positive?
Yeah, this is when it's really helpful if you know yourself. If you know yourself and you're clear about, well, what is it that grounds me? I've always talked about this in the sense of being clear on what's your purpose, which isn't necessarily your job, but what's your purpose? And so maybe on your team, you're the extrovert that's the cheerleader. And so if that's your purpose, then what are you doing to continue to be the cheerleader for your team and trying to help, to pull them up? If your purpose is, really, I just love to educate people, then what are you doing to put yourself in a situation where you can educate people? So the answer to this question is a lot easier if you're clear about what kind of gets you going, what excites you, what's the part of your job that you really like. In the absence of that, well, I'm an ex-professor and I'm going to give people homework. And I'm going to say, go figure that out. Go figure out what is it that you like to do. What are you great at? What do people tell you that you're really great at? What do you love doing? You kind of find that intersection, and you find what you can sort of ground on and rely on to kind of get you through the difficult times. I have ended all of my conversations by saying, take care of yourself, care of others, and this too shall pass. We don't know when, but it will. And with that, I would just like to thank you all, and we look forward to talking to you at another time. Thank you.